Brenda's voice blasted through my phone like a thunderclap, barking, "They drained our entire lake overnight. I don't give a damn about your granddad's lake. I need cash and that pathetic puddle's history by morning." I stood frozen, staring at the wreckage of what once was our stunning lake, now reduced to a reeking swamp of mud and rotting fish. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, and in that moment I vowed to make the HOA choke on their own mess. Where were you watching from? Drop a comment below. The morning kicked off like any other Tuesday, until a deafening rumble jolted me awake at 5 a.m. I stumbled to the window, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and there they were, 3 hulking water-pumping trucks lined up along the shore, their engines roaring as they siphoned the life out of my grandfather's cherished lake. The water vanished fast, like someone had yanked the plug on the world's biggest bathtub, leaving dead fish bobbing to the surface, their silver scales glinting in the dawn before sinking into the oozing mud. The stench, a nauseating blend of decay and damp earth, turned my stomach. I yanked on yesterday's clothes and bolted outside, my bare feet squelching in the muddy grass. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled at the nearest driver, but he just shrugged and pointed to a clipboard stamped with the HOA's smug seal. The emergency HOA meeting that afternoon was a madhouse. Brenda Sullivan stood at the podium like a commanding general, her fake Gucci purse catching the light as she fluorescent lights. She was in her late 40s with that kind of aggressive bob haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," before she even opened her mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, her voice dripping with false concern, "I've called this meeting to address the serious flood risk posed by the lake. Our safety expert has determined that immediate action was necessary to protect our community." She waved a document in the air, like it was the Constitution itself. I squinted at it from my seat in the back row, noticing the letter head looked suspiciously pixelated, like someone had scanned it one too many times. The numbers on the report seemed fishy too, claiming water levels that would have made our little lake deeper than Lake Michigan. After the meeting, I found old Hank Dawson standing by what was left of the lake, his weathered hands gripping his walking stick. "Lost my wife 2 years ago," he muttered, not really looking at me. "This lake's all I got left. Used to come here every morning, feed the ducks with Martha. Now look at it." His voice cracked and I saw tears in his eyes. Hank had been around since the neighborhood was built, had helped design the original water system. If anyone knew the truth about this lake, it was him. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his frail frame. "We're not going to let them get away with this, Hank," I promised, though I had no idea how I'd keep that promise yet. That evening, I dug through every public record I could find online. The safety report Brenda had waved around was supposedly done by Clearwater Environmental Solutions. But when I searched for them, all I found was a website that looked like it was made in the 909 and hadn't been updated since. The phone number led to a disconnected line, the address a vacant lot in Nevada. As I was piecing this together, my doorbell rang. Tessa Harper stood on my porch, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "Hey, Ryan," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I think you need to see this." She was 28, worked as a freelance accountant, and had a reputation for being able to find dirt on anyone. Her dad had planted those beautiful oak trees that lined our street. Before the HOA forced him to sell and move away, Tessa opened her laptop on my kitchen table and pulled up an email thread she'd somehow gotten her hands on. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a conversation between Brenda and someone named Todd Ramsey. The emails talked about Sunrise Really, about a deal worth $100,000, about how the lake situation needed to be resolved quickly. My blood ran cold as I read through them. They weren't just draining the lake for safety, they were planning to sell the land to developers. How did you get these? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Tessa just smiled that mischievous smile of hers. Let's just say Brenda should use stronger passwords than her dog's name, followed by 1123. At the next HOA meeting, I tried to bring up my concerns about the legitimacy of the safety report. Brenda's face turned red as a tomato. "Mr. Foster, you're out of order," she shrieked. "This constant disruption is unacceptable. I'm finding you $200 for disturbing the peace of this meeting." Todd Ramsey, sitting in the front row, with his real estate broker blazer turned around and smirked at me. "Don't mess with Brenda, pal," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." But I was starting to get an idea, especially when I noticed the Rolex on his wrist and remembered he'd been crying poverty just last month, when it came time to pay for the community landscaping. Digging deeper into the leaked emails that night, I found something that made my jaw drop. There was a mention of a lawsuit from 5 years ago. Something about Brenda selling properties that later flooded the buyers had sued her for $300, 0, claiming she knew about the flood risk and hid it. The parallels were too obvious to ignore. She was recreating her old scam in reverse, claiming flood risk where there was none to make a quick buck. But the real kicker came when I found a receipt attached to one of the emails. $50, 00 paid to Clearwater Environmental Solutions for consultation services, the same company that didn't exist. I looked out my window at Brenda's house across the street, her kitchen light still on at midnight. Gucci bags might float. "Brenda," I muttered to myself, "but they won't help you when you're drowning in your own mud." Just then, I heard it, the roar of heavy machinery starting up in the darkness. I ran outside to see a bulldozer's headlights cutting through the night, positioned right at the edge of where our lake used to be. They weren't just draining it, they were getting ready to destroy it completely. Brenda was standing there in her bathrobe talking to the operator, gesturing wildly at the empty lake bed. She was ready to bulldoze my grandfather's legacy for her cash grab. But I had just found her dirty little secret, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The war for our lake had officially begun. Brenda is calling herself the future mayor now, I said to my phone, camera holding it up as I walked past her house, where she was showing blueprints to some suits from Sunrise Realty. She's waving around plans for a luxury resort right where our lake used to be. But I got this, I flashed my phone screen showing the recording app with Brenda's voice captured in digital waves. What should be my next move? Drop a comment and let me know. The morning sun cast long shadows across the muddy crater that used to be our community's heart, and I could already see survey stakes driven into the ground like tombstones for what we'd lost. Brenda's new rules came down like hammerstones. That week, no pets visible in front yards, no house colors except approved earth tones, no garden decorations that weren't on her pre-approved list. She even started a newsletter called Clearview Heights Excellence, which was basically a hit list disguised as community news. This month's Troublemakers, one section read, with my picture right at the top, Ian Foster continues to spread dangerous misinformation about our community improvement projects. The kids in the neighborhood were the real victims, though I watched them stand at the edge of the empty lake bed, holding bags of breadcrumbs they used to feed to the fish. Where did all the fishies go? One little girl asked her mom, and I had to turn away before the anger made me do something stupid. The next HOA meeting was even worse than the last one. I stood up during the public comment period holding a stack of papers. I'd like to discuss the legitimacy of the environmental report that was used to justify draining our lake, I began. But Brenda cut me off immediately. Mr. Foster, you're becoming a nuisance to this community, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Your constant accusations and disruptions are creating a hostile environment for our residents. She turned to the crowd. Playing victim, I worked tirelessly for this community, sacrificing my time and energy, and this is the thanks I get. A few people actually applauded, and I realized how deep her claws had sunk into our neighbors. Fear was a powerful tool, and Brenda wielded it like a master. That's when she dropped the hammer. I'm finding you $500 for repeated violations of HOA conduct rules, and you'll personally clean up the mud around the former lake area, since you seem so concerned about it. After the meeting, neighbors who used to wave at me now avoided eye contact. Bob from 2 houses down actually crossed the street when he saw me coming. The fear was spreading like a disease. Everyone was terrified of becoming Brenda's next target, of seeing their names in her newsletter, of facing fines they couldn't afford. I found Tessa in her garage working on what looked like a small camera setup. People are scared, she said without looking up. My dad was the same way when they came after our trees. The HOA said they were a safety hazard, that the roots would damage the sidewalks. He fought it for months, spent thousands on lawyers, but in the end they wore him down. She showed me a photo on her phone of massive oak trees, probably 60 years old. 3 generations of our family climbed those trees. Now they're gone. And all because Brenda wanted a clear view for her real estate friends. I spent the next few days doing exactly what Brenda ordered, cleaning mud from around the lake bed. But I wasn't just cleaning, I was documenting everything. Taking pictures of the unnatural water linings, the industrial-grade pumping equipment marks the survey stakes that had appeared overnight while rummaging through Todd Ramsey's trash one evening. Not my proudest moment, but desperate times, I found something interesting. A receipt from the same pumping company that had drained our lake, dated a week before the supposed emergency drainage they'd planned this whole thing in advance. The safety crisis was as fake as Brenda's designer purse. I also noticed Todd kept looking over his shoulder whenever he was outside, like he was afraid someone was watching him. There was more to his story, I was sure of it. That's when Tessa made her biggest discovery yet. She showed up at my door with her laptop and a grin that meant trouble for someone. Remember how Brenda mentioned she used to work in real estate? She asked, pulling up an old newspaper article. Well, she didn't just work in it. She was sued for selling flood-prone properties to unsuspecting buyers $300. 0 in damages, but here's the kicker. She never paid it. Declared bankruptcy, hid her assets, and started over here. In Clear View Heights, the article had a picture of a younger Brenda, same harsh face but with longer hair, standing in front of a sold sign. The headline read, "Local Realtor Accused of Flood Property Scam." We had her pattern now create a crisis, manipulate property values, cash in and leave others to deal with the mess. The recording I'd mentioned in my intro came from the most recent HOA board meeting. I'd hidden my phone in my jacket pocket, and it caught Brenda in full tyrant mode. I don't care if they've lived here for 30 years. Her voice crackled through my speaker. Cross me and they're done. I'll find them into bankruptcy if I have to. This is my kingdom now. Hank had been there too, trying to present a petition signed by 43 residents asking to refill the lake. Brenda had literally laughed in his face. "Mr. Dawson, at your age, you should be worried about more important things than a muddy hole in the ground." The disrespect made my blood boil. Hank had designed half the infrastructure in this neighborhood, and she treated him like a senile old fool. Later that night, while I was reviewing all the evidence we'd gathered, my security camera picked up something interesting. A car I didn't recognize crept slowly past my house at half midnight. It stopped for a moment, and I saw someone lean out the passenger window. The next morning, I found "back off" spray painted across my garage door in red paint that looked like blood in the dawn light. But the joke was on them, because my camera had caught the license plate, and a quick search showed it was registered to a company called Sunrise Holdings, LLC, the same parent company as Sunrise, really. The receipt I'd found in Todd's trash wasn't just about draining the lake. It was tied to someone much bigger than our little HOA president. And now they knew I was onto them. The stakes had just gotten a whole lot higher, and I realized this wasn't just about saving a lake anymore. This was about exposing a conspiracy that went deeper than any of us had imagined. Brenda's got security guards following me around now like I'm some kind of criminal. I told my camera while standing next to a rusted water valve hidden behind the old pump house. Hank stood beside me, his weathered hands steady despite his age. But with Hank's help, we're about to turn the tables. Should we flood it now or wait? For the perfect moment, comment below A for flood it now or B for patience. The valve looked like it hadn't been touched in years, red with rust and covered in cobwebs, but Hank assured me it still worked. And when it came to the water system in Clearview Heights, Hank's word was gospel. He'd installed half these pipes himself back in the 1980s when the neighborhood was just starting out. The team was coming together nicely. Tessa brought her tech skills and her justified anger about those. Oak trees, Hank brought decades of knowledge about every pipe, valve and water line in the neighborhood. And me, I brought the determination of a man who'd watched his grandfather's legacy get sucked into pumping trucks while a corrupt HOA president counted her blood money. We met in Hank's garage, surrounded by old blueprints and pipe diagrams that looked like they belonged in a museum. The lake system works like a giant garden hose network underground. Hank explained, tracing the lines with a shaky finger. Water wants to find its level. Close this valve here, open that one there, and redirect the flow from the storm drains, and suddenly Brenda's perfect lawn becomes a swamp. His eyes twinkled with mischief that made him look 20 years younger. Of course you didn't hear that from me. I'm just an old man who feeds ducks. The first phase of our plan was subtle. Late one night, I crept out to the pump house with a wrench and a flashlight. The valve was stubborn. Decades of disuse fighting against me. But finally, it gave way with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty lake bed. Nothing happened at first, but then I heard it. A gurgling sound from deep underground, water finding new paths, seeking new destinations. By morning, the lowest part of the lake bed was muddy again, not filled, but definitely wetter than Brenda had left it. Small puddles formed here and there, just enough to make the Sunrise Really surveyor shake their heads and postpone their work grounds. Too unstable. I heard one of them tell Todd need to wait for it to dry out completely. Todd's face went red and he immediately called. Brenda Tessa's contribution was genius in its simplicity. She created anonymous social media accounts and started spreading concerns about building on the former lake bed. Heard the ground there is saturated year-round. One post read, "My cousin built on similar land, and his foundation cracked within 2 years." The posts were picked up by local community groups, shared and reshared, until even people who had supported Brenda were asking questions. A for sale by sunrise, really sign that had been hastily erected by the lake bed, became a gathering point for concerned neighbours. "They can't build here," Mrs. Patterson from Maple Street said loudly. "This is community land." The protest was small but growing, and I could see it was making both Brenda and Todd nervous. Speaking of Todd, he was becoming increasingly paranoid. I noticed him checking his rearview mirror constantly when he drove, looking over his shoulder when he walked his dog. During one HOA meeting, when someone mentioned investigating the lake drainage further, he went pale and excused himself to the bathroom. Tessa did some digging and found out why. Turns out Todd had been involved in a similar scheme 5 years ago in another state. Something about artificially inflating property values. He'd escaped prosecution, but just barely. No wonder he was jumpy. He knew what could happen if everything unraveled. One evening, I accidentally bumped into him at the grocery store. "Nervous about something, Todd?" I asked innocently. His hand shook as he loaded his cart. "You don't know who you're messing with," he whispered. "This goes higher than Brenda, way higher." Then came the escalation I'd been expecting. I woke up one morning to find my electricity had been cut off. The power company claimed it was for non-payment, even though I had the receipts. Proving otherwise, it took 3 days of calls and a lawyer's letter to get it restored. Living in darkness for 3 days, charging my phone in my car, keeping my food in a cooler with ice, it was Brenda's way of showing me she could make my life hell. Neighbours noticed, of course. Mrs. Jane brought me cassoulets. Worried I couldn't cook. Mr. Rodriguez offered his generator, but I could see the fear in their eyes too. If Brenda could do this to me, what could she do to them? The psychological warfare was almost as effective as the practical harassment. But we weren't backing down. Tessa's cameras, strategically placed around the neighborhood, started capturing interesting footage. Brenda meeting with city officials at odd hours, envelopes changing, hands hushed, conversations in parking lots. One particularly damning video showed her handing a thick envelope to someone from the zoning department. "Just need you to fast-track this approval." Her voice was faint but audible. "There's more where that came from." We had evidence of bribery, now actual criminal activity. The water tricks were just the beginning. We were building a case that could bring down her whole corrupt empire, Todd's contract with Sunrise Realty, which Tessa had somehow gotten her hands on, showed kickbacks and under-the-table payments that would make any prosecutor salivate. The water situation was escalating too. A redirected flow was working better than expected. The puddles in the lake bed grew larger each day, and water was starting to seep into unexpected places. Brina's prized lawn, always green even in drought, started developing soggy patches. Her next HOA community picnic had to be relocated when the planned location turned into a mud pit overnight. "Must be all this unusual weather," she announced, but I could see the suspicion in her eye. She knew something was up, but couldn't prove it. The best part was when her designer shoes got stuck in the mud during the picnic, and she had to abandon them, walking barefoot to her car while trying to maintain her dignity. Brenda's picnic turned into more of a swamp buffet. I told my camera later, trying not to laugh. That night, while reviewing footage from Tessa's cameras, I noticed something odd. There was a moment during the HOA picnic where Brenda had stood alone by the empty lake bed, holding an old photo. Stared at it for a long time, and I swear I saw her shoulders shake like she was crying. But then Todd had approached, and she'd quickly hidden the photo and put her harsh mask back on. It was a crack in her armor, a hint that maybe there was more to her story than just greed. But I pushed that thought aside. She destroyed something precious to our community. Whatever her reasons, she had to be stopped. The water continued to flow underground, finding its way into places it hadn't been welcome before. Our counterattack was working, but I knew Brenda wouldn't take this lying down. The real fight was just beginning. Tessa just tricked Sunrise really into a muddy trap with a fake email I said to my camera, holding up my phone to show a threatening text message that had just come through. The words glowed menacingly on the screen. Back off or you'll regret it. So what's my play here? Drop a comment and let me know. The morning mist hung over the swampy remains of what used to be Brenda's perfect lawn, and I couldn't help but smile at the poetic justice of it all. Sometimes you had to fight dirty to beat dirty players, and we were just getting started with our swamp warfare. Tessa's fake email was a masterpiece of deception. She'd spoofed the HOA's official email address and sent a message to Sunrise Really inviting them to survey the lake bed at the optimal time for ground assessment. That optimal time just happened to coincide with our planned flooding. The surveyors showed up in their clean khakis and polo shirts, equipment in hand, ready to map out their future development. What they found instead was a muddy disaster. Water had seeped up through the ground overnight, turning the entire area into a bog. Their fancy surveying equipment sank into the mud, and one of them lost a shoe trying to retrieve a dropped tablet. This is impossible, I heard the lead surveyor tell his team. Grounds more saturated than a marsh. No way we can build here without major drainage work. The best part was they thought it was natural groundwater, not our carefully orchestrated flooding. Todd was cracking under the pressure. Tessa had sent him a text from a burner phone. I know about Arizona. Drop the deal, or your scam goes online. I watched from my window. As he read it, his face going through a whole spectrum of colors from red to white to green. He immediately tried calling the number back, but of course Tessa had already disposed of the phone. That evening, he showed up at my door, sweating despite the cool air. Listen, Foster, he said, looking around nervously. You don't understand what you're messing with, these people. Sunrise, really, they're connected. They've got judges, cops, city officials in their pockets. Just back off, and maybe we can work something out. I leaned against my doorframe, trying to look casual, despite my racing heart. Sorry, Todd, can't help you. Maybe you should have thought about that before you helped drain our lake. The water situation was escalating beyond our original plan. Hank and I had opened more valves, redirecting storm drain flow and groundwater seepage. The water table in the area was naturally high. We just helped it find its way to the surface in strategic locations. The irony was beautiful because Brenda's fake flood risk was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Water was creeping toward her house, lapping at the edge of her property line. My own fence was starting to show water damage, but it was a small price to pay. The entire lake bed had become a wetland again. Not a lake yet, but certainly not the dry land. Sunrise really needed frogs, had already started moving in their croaking, creating a nighttime symphony that I'm sure drove Brenda crazy. Brenda's HOA community picnic was supposed to be her victory. Celebration. She'd sent out flyers announcing the future of Clearview Heights with artist renderings of the resort that would replace our lake. Instead, it turned into a disaster of epic proportions. The picnic area was a swamp tables sinking into mud, the expensive catered food getting splattered with muck as people tried to navigate the terrain. I watched from a distance as Brendan tried to maintain her composure, her designer heels sinking deeper with each step. "This is just temporary. Water retention," she announced desperately. "The development will include state-of-the-art drainage." But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Mrs. Patterson loudly asked why we needed a resort when we'd had a perfectly good lake. Mr. Rodriguez wondered aloud about property values if the area was this prone to flooding. In the midst of all this chaos, I caught a moment that made me pause. Tessa was sitting in her car, holding that photo of her father's oak trees, tears streaming down her face. "Sometimes I wonder if we're going too far," she said. "When I knocked on her window, Dad wouldn't have wanted this. He'd have found a legal way." I got in the passenger seat, understanding her conflict. "Your dad fought the legal way, and they still took his trees." I reminded her gently, "Sometimes the system is so corrupt that you have to work outside it to get justice." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're right, I just miss him. Those trees were his legacy." The mini twist came when we discovered the truth about Brenda's contract with the city. Tessa had finally cracked into Todd's cloud storage and found the smoking gun. The contract showed that Brenda had bribed Marcus Wheeler, a city zoning official, with $30,000 to fast-track approval for rezoning the lake area from community space to commercial development. The documentation was all there, including bank transfers, email exchanges, even photos of the meeting at a coffee shop. But the real kicker was a note in Todd's files: "Wheeler's getting cold feet, may need to increase his cut." That evening, I got my own moment of crisis. The water damage to my fence had gotten worse, and I realized our flooding was starting to affect my own property. Was I becoming as destructive as Brenda? In my quest for revenge, I stood by my damaged fence, second-guessing everything, when Hank appeared beside me. "Your granddad faced the same choice," once he said quietly. "Back in '92, developers wanted to fill in the lake. He could have fought dirty, but he chose to rally the community instead. Took longer, but it worked." I felt a pang of guilt. "So I'm dishonoring his memory." Hank chuckled. "No, son. Times were different then. The system still worked. Now sometimes you got to flood the swamp to drain it." The chapter's climax came during another HOA meeting. Brenda was in full meltdown mode, screaming about leaks and sabotage. "Someone in this room is sharing private HOA information. When I find out who, I'll sue you into bankruptcy." Tessa sat next to me, the picture of innocence, while I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. That's when I lost my cool for a moment. "Maybe if you hadn't drained our lake, we wouldn't have these problems," I shouted, immediately regretting it as Brenda's eyes locked onto mine with laser focus. "That's it, Foster, you're behind this." But before she could continue, her phone rang. Todd's panicked voice was audible even from across the room. "Brenda, my whole deck is flooded. There are frogs in my hot tub." That night, the stakes rose dramatically. I was reviewing security footage when I saw it happen. A rock came flying through Brenda's front window, followed by a surge of water from a burst pipe in her yard. Her scream echoed through the neighborhood as water flooded into her living room. But here's the thing, it wasn't us. We hadn't touched her pipes. Someone else was playing this game now, someone with less restraint than we had, as sirens wailed in the distance and neighbors gathered to gawk at Brenda's flooded house. I realized our controlled chaos had inspired others to take matters into their own hands. She's swearing to bury me in legal hell. I told my camera later, watching the police cars' flashing lights reflect off the water, but I just lit a fuse under her whole scam, and now the entire neighborhood's about to explode. Brenda is suing me for vandalism, and she's got a fake video of me wrecking the lake pipes. I said to my camera, my hands shaking slightly as I held up a photo I had just taken. The cops nearly arrested me an hour ago because of her lies, but look what I caught. The image showed a Sunrise Really truck parked in Brenda's driveway at 3 giddy in the morning. Men unloading what looked like surveillance equipment. Can I get out of this mess? Comment below, I need all the advice I can get. The weight of the situation was crushing me. This wasn't just about a lake anymore, this was about my freedom, my home, my entire life, that Brenda was trying to destroy with her web of lies and corruption. The lawsuit had arrived that morning, hand-delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick envelope. You've been served, he said quietly, then whispered, "Good luck, man. I live here too. We missed the lake." Inside was a massive document accusing me of vandalism, destruction of property, creating public health hazards, and about 15 other charges I'd never even heard. Of the damages Brenda was seeking, $500. 000. More than my house was worth more than I'd make in 10 years at the warehouse. But the worst part was the evidence she'd attached, including a grainy video that supposedly showed me breaking pipes near the lake bed. The figure in the video wore clothes similar to mine, had my build, but the face was conveniently obscured. A community meeting, Brenda called, was a masterclass in manipulation. She'd hired a professional PR firm to help her spin the narrative. They'd created a slick presentation, complete with charts showing water table disruption patterns and environmental impact assessments that all pointed to sabotage. This isn't just about property damage, Brenda announced to the packed room, her voice dripping with fake concern. This is about the safety of our children. Who knows what contaminants have been released into our groundwater? She actually managed to squeeze out a tear as she talked about the terrorism being inflicted on our peaceful community. The video played on a loop behind her, that shadowy figure that was supposed to be me destroying everything. Then came the social media campaign. Somehow, Brenda had gotten Marcus Wheeler, the corrupt zoning official, to tweet about the dangerous vigilante terrorizing Clearview Heights. The tweet went viral in our local community groups. Residents deserve to feel safe in their homes. We're investigating all criminal acts. Seriously, his official account posted along. With a link to the video, the comments were brutal. People who didn't even live in our neighborhood were calling for my arrest. Someone leaked my address and I started getting pizza deliveries. I hadn't ordered phone calls at all hours. The psychological warfare was intense. I hadn't slept properly in days, jumping at every sound, wondering if the cops were coming back. In the middle of this nightmare, I noticed Tessa was pulling back. She showed up at my house one evening, laptop closed, looking troubled. "Ryan, I'm having second thoughts," she said, not meeting my eyes. "The hacking, the water stuff. Now people are getting hurt. What if someone sues me? What if I lose my freelance clients?" I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear Brenda had instilled in everyone else. My dad wouldn't want me to risk everything like this. I wanted to be angry, but I understood Brenda was systematically destroying anyone who opposed her. "I get it," I told her, though my heart was sinking. "Do what you need to do to protect yourself." But as she turned to leave, I noticed something odd. She left her laptop bag slightly open and I could see a small camera inside its red recording light, blinking. Hank was the one who kept me grounded during this insanity. He showed up every morning with coffee and wisdom. "I've seen bullies like Brenda before," he said one day, watching the news coverage of our local water crisis on my TV. "They push and push until someone pushes back harder, then they crumble." He'd been doing his own investigation using his old engineering contacts to analyze the fake flood report. "This report's got more holes than Swiss cheese," he announced, showing me his findings. "The water table measurements are off by meters. The soil composition data is from a completely different area. Hell, they even got the lakes' depth wrong by half." The mini twist came from an unexpected source. While I was documenting Sunrise Realty's late-night visits to Brenda's house, I caught something on camera that changed everything. Todd Ramsey was in his car, talking on the phone, and his window was down just enough for my camera's audio to pick up his conversation. "I don't care what Brenda promised you," he was saying. "I'm not going down for this. The foster kid's got evidence, and if he connects me to Arizona, I'm finished." There was a pause. "Then fine, I'll send you everything I have on Brenda, but after this, we're done." He was flipping on Brenda to save himself. The emotional breakthrough happened when I was at my lowest. I was sitting by the muddy lake bed, ready to give up, when I remembered something my grandfather had told me. We'd been fishing. I was maybe 8 years old, and I'd gotten frustrated because the fish weren't biting patience. "Ryan," he'd said, his eyes twinkling like the water, "the lake remembers everything. Every stone thrown, every life saved, every promise made. Trust the water, and it'll show you the way." I'd thought it was just grandpa wisdom back then, but now, surrounded by the chaos I'd helped create, I understood. This lake had been the heart of our community for generations. That night, I played Brenda's threatening phone recording at an impromptu gathering in the park. "Cross me and you're done." Her voice echoed across the crowd. The neighbors who'd been suspicious of me started to see the truth. Mrs. Patterson stood up first. "She fined me $300 for my garden gnomes," she said. "Then Mr. Rodriguez $500 for painting my door the wrong shade of babe." One by one, people shared their stories of Brenda's abuse of power. The tide was turning, but Brenda wasn't done yet. As the gathering broke up, police sirens filled the air again. This time, they surrounded the park, lights flashing, officers approaching. With hands on their weapons, Ryan Foster, the lead officer, called out, "You're under arrest for criminal vandalism and creating a public health hazard." As they cuffed me, I saw Brenda watching from her house, that satisfied smirk, visible even from a distance. But what she didn't see was Tessa's camera capturing everything, or the crowd of neighbors filming on their phones, or Hank calling every I died or do media contact he'd accumulated over 70 years of life. My phone, which the officers hadn't taken yet, buzzed with an incoming email. The sender was Todd Ramsey, and the subject line read, "Everything you need to bury her." Attached were documents showing Brenda's entire criminal network, including evidence that she'd been funneling HOA funds through offshore accounts. As the police car pulled away, I saw neighbors reading the same email on their phones as Todd had, sent it to everyone. "She's got the cops closing in on me," I said to the officer, but my secret lens caught her red hand. Hank just exposed Brenda's fake report to the entire neighborhood, and her basement's flooded worse than the Titanic. I laughed. Into my camera, exhausted but exhilarated after being released on bail that morning, she went on social media to live stream her victory speech and then slipped in the mud on live video, 20,000 views, and counting. Do we end it here or give her more? Swamp justice. Comment below. The last 48 hours had been the wildest ride of my life, from a jail cell to a hero's welcome, and we were just getting started with the final act of this drama. The basement flooding was poetic justice at its finest. While I had been sitting in jail, Hank had organized what he called the Great Revelation. He'd gathered 32 neighbors at the community center and presented his engineering analysis of the fake flood report using charts, graphs, and his decades of expertise. He systematically destroyed every claim Brenda had made. The groundwater levels she cited would mean we're living in Atlantis, he'd said, getting laughs from the crowd. But the real kicker came when he showed them the water flow patterns. All our redirected water hadn't just randomly flooded areas, it had followed the natural water table that Brenda's own report had grossly misrepresented. The water had found its way into her basement through old drainage pipes, carrying with it a special surprise. Dozens of frogs that had made themselves at home. Brenda's live-stream victory speech was supposed to be her moment of triumph. She'd set up her phone in her living room, not knowing her basement was slowly filling with swamp water below. Justice has been served, she preached to her audience, wearing a new designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. The terrorist who tried to destroy our community is behind bars where he belongs. That's when the first frog hopped into frame behind her, then another and another. The comments section exploded with laughter and frog emojis. But the best part came when she stood up to show off the future site plans for the resort. The movement must have shifted the house's weight just enough, because suddenly there was a creaking sound and water started seeping through the floor. Her designer heels slipped on the suddenly wet hardwood, and down she went right into a puddle of muddy water. Todd's situation had gotten even more desperate. While hiding from both Brenda and the authorities, he'd gotten stuck in his own backyard when the flooding turned his lawn into quicksand-like mud. I heard about it from Tessa, who'd been monitoring. Emergency services radio help. Someone help me. His voice had crackled over the airwaves. I'm stuck and sinking. When the fire department finally pulled him out 3 hours later, covered head to toe in mud, he was ready to confess everything. The emails he'd sent weren't just damning for Brenda. They included records of every bribe, every kickback, every dirty deal she'd made over the past 5 years. The FBI had gotten involved now because some of the money had crossed state lines. The community's response to all this evidence was swift and decisive. The neighbors who'd been filming my arrest had already started a campaign called Justice for the Lake. The video of police arresting me while Brenda smirked had gone viral, especially after someone synced it with the footage of her falling in her own flooded living room. The contrast was perfect. Me being led away in handcuffs for trying to save our community space, and her literally falling into the swamp she'd created through greed and corruption. The bail money had been crowdsourced in less than 6 hours, with contributions coming from people I'd never even met. Mrs. Patterson had organized a phone tree to call every local news station. The mini twist that really sealed Brenda's fate came from the most unlikely source, the frogs. When animal control was called to remove him from Brenda's basement, they discovered that several were endangered species that only thrived in specific wetland conditions. The Environmental Protection Agency got involved, declaring the lakebed a protected habitat. Suddenly, not only could Sunrise really not build their resort, but the lake had to be restored to protect the endangered frog population. The irony was delicious. Brenda's fake environmental report had led to real environmental protection, just not the kind she'd wanted. The look on her face when the EPA officials showed up with cease and desist orders was priceless. That evening, As the sun set over our slowly recovering wetland, I found myself standing with Hank by the water's edge. The lake bed was more swamp than lake still, but water was returning naturally now that the drainage had been stopped. "Your granddad would be proud," Hank said, casting his fishing lie into one of the deeper pools that had formed. "You fought dirty when you had to, but you won. Clean." I thought about his words as I watched the ripple spread across the water. Had I gone too far? Maybe. But sometimes you had to get muddy to clean up corruption. Tessa joined us holding that photo of her father's trees. "I'm thinking of planting new ones," she said quietly. "Dad would like that new trees for a new beginning." The final confrontation with Brenda came at an emergency HOA meeting called to address the crisis. She stood at the podium, designer clothes replaced with a simple suit. Her usual arrogance dimmed but not extinguished. I still maintain that my actions were in the best interest of this community. She began, but the crowd wasn't having it. The evidence was too overwhelming, the community too united against her. When the vote came to remove her as HOA president, it was unanimous. But the real blow came when the district attorney's representatives stood up to announce the criminal charges: embezzlement, bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about a dozen other counts. As they read her rights and led her away in handcuffs, she held an old photograph clutched in her hand. I caught a glimpse of it, a young Brenda with what looked like her grandparents standing by our lake. The cliffhanger arrived, as I thought. We'd won. Brenda's yard was indeed churning with dead fish and frogs, her neighbors filming every moment of her muddy meltdown as she tried to escape the amphibian invasion. But as the police carrying her pulled away, she pressed her face to the window and mouthed words that chilled me. "You have no idea what you've started." Her lawyer, who had been suspiciously absent during her arrest, was already on his phone, and I overheard him say, "Yes, sir, the Clearview situation is compromised. Activate the contingency." The frogs in Brenda's yard suddenly went silent, as if sensing a greater predator approaching. "She's waving evidence that I flooded her place," I told my camera, a cold dread settling in my stomach. But I think I just triggered something much bigger than a simple HOA scan. Brenda's live streaming her victory right now, but wait for it. "The cops are about to crash her party," I said to my camera, holding my grandfather's old fishing rod. "The lakes is back, the frogs have taken over her yard, and justice is about to be served ice cold." What do you think happens next? Drop a comment below. The morning sun sparkled on the water that had returned to our lake bed, not fully restored yet, but alive again. And I couldn't help but grin at how perfectly everything had fallen into place. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and in Brenda's case, that humor manifested in amphibious justice. The revelation about Tessa's hidden cameras changed everything. While I'd been playing the obvious troublemaker, drawing Brenda's attention, Tessa had been playing the long game. Those cameras she'd been testing had captured every shady meeting, every bribe, every conspiracy planning session. The footage was damning. There was Brenda meeting with Marcus Wheeler at 2 in the morning, handing over stacks of cash. There was Todd photocopying HOA documents for Sunrise Realty executives. But the crown jewel was a conversation between Brenda and her lawyer where she explicitly discussed framing me for vandalism. The boy's too naive to see it coming. She'd said counting money at her kitchen table. Well, this naive boy had friends who were anything but. I'd submitted everything to the real estate board, the FBI, and every relevant authority. The packet was comprehensive. Emails showing the kickback scheme, contracts revealing the bribery network, the fake environmental report with Hank's engineering analysis, and hours of video footage. The investigators were particularly interested in the financial crimes, forensic Accountants found nearly $200,000 had been skimmed over Brenda's 5-year reign. That money was supposed to go toward community improvements. Instead, it went to her designer bags, luxury car payments, and the bribe she used to try to destroy our community. The police raid on Brenda's livestream was comedy gold. She was explaining how she'd saved the community from dangerous elements when the doorbell rang. Still streaming, she walked to the door with confidence. Probably another neighbor coming too. "Thank me," she said to her audience. The look on her face when she opened the door to find FBI agents was priceless. "Brenda Sullivan, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials." The list went on as they read her rights, all captured on her own live stream. The viewer count exploded as people shared the stream. When they walked her out in handcuffs, she had to wade through her flooded yard where dozens of frogs had congregated, croaking a victory chorus. Todd's fate was equally poetic. After getting stuck in his yard and pulled out by firefighters, he'd flipped on everyone to save himself. The Arizona scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been running similar scams in 3 states, always partnering with corrupt HOA boards. The FBI had been building a case for years, and our situation gave them the final evidence. When they arrested him, he was fleeing town with documents to destroy, among them the original plans, showing the lake had been designated as permanent community space by the town's founders, making Brenda's entire scheme illegal from the start. The lake's restoration became a community celebration. The EPA's endangered species designation meant the lake had to be restored, and the whole neighborhood pitched in. Kids who'd grown up feeding fish here brought their own children to help plant water lilies. Hank supervised the restoration of the water system. Even some of Brenda's former supporters showed up apologizing for being fooled. The government seized Brenda's assets to pay for restoration and re-embezzled the funds. Watching the water return clear and clean, I thought about my grandfather and how proud he would have been, not of the fighting, but of the community coming together. The twist that made everything official came from an unexpected source. Those endangered frogs weren't just random amphibians. A university researcher identified them as a species thought to be locally extinct. For 20 years, their presence proved the lake had always been a vital ecosystem, not the dangerous flood risk Brenda had claimed. The environmental protection was ironclad now. No future board could ever try to sell or develop this land. The frogs that had invaded Brenda's basement had literally saved their own habitat by exposing her crimes. The final HOA meeting under new leadership was a complete reversal. Mrs. Patterson opened with, "This HOA exists to serve the community, not rule it. Restrictive." Rules were repealed, excessive fines refunded, and the lake was designated as permanently protected. They offered me the position of lake keeper officially, but I declined. "The lake doesn't need a keeper," I said. "It needs a community, and that's all of us." We formed a volunteer committee with Hank as advisor and Tessa managing the budget. Todd seized assets, created a fund for community improvements, turning his greed into our gain. The climax came when the district attorney announced the full charges Brenda faced: embezzlement, fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and racketeering. The shady bank account revealed she'd been laundering money through 3 states. She built a criminal empire on HOA fees and property scams. As they detailed her crimes to the packed courtroom, she clutched that old photograph I'd glimpsed before. It showed young Brenda, with her grandparents by our lake fishing rods in hand. For a moment I saw tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to matter," she whispered. "I wanted to leave something behind, but greed had corrupted whatever good intentions she might have once had." 6 months Later, the lake was fully restored. Brenda was serving 5 years. Todd got 8. But the real victory wasn't their punishment. It was in what grew from the ashes. Kids were fishing again. Families were picnicking, and sunrise over the lake was as beautiful as my grandfather had always described. As I stood by the water, one morning, fishing rod in hand, a frog hopped onto the dock beside me. "Thanks, buddy," I said, and I swear it croaked back. But during my final filming, something caught my eye, a crossie. The lake in neighboring Riverside Heights, a woman in a power suit was arguing with elderly residents about their community garden. She waved official documents, talking about safety concerns and property values. Behind her, that familiar logo, Sunrise, really a different branch. Same scheme. Looks like another swamp creature needs dealing with. I told my camera, zooming in as she smiled that predatory smile. The frog beside me croaked ominously as storm clouds gathered. The lake's safe here, but somewhere else another community is under threat. A rumble echoed from the pipes below, as if the water itself was preparing for the next battle.